Welcome to Soft Spoken Mysteries. Tonight, we're exploring two empires that once rivaled Rome itself, yet somehow disappeared from history for over 1,000 years. In our first story, we travel to the Highlands of Ethiopia, where an African superpower once controlled the Red Sea trade routes and became one of the four greatest empires of the ancient world. The Kingdom of Aksum minted its own gold coins, built towering stone obelisks that still stand today, and was among the first nations to embrace Christianity. Then it vanished. For centuries, the world forgot that this mighty empire ever existed. Then we'll journey to the rose-red deserts of Jordan, where nomadic traders carved an entire city into living rock. The Nabataeans controlled the frankincense and spice routes, accumulating wealth beyond imagination. They built Petra, a hidden capital so spectacular that it seems almost impossible. Yet when Rome annexed their kingdom, the Nabataeans simply disappeared. Their language, their culture, their very identity faded into the desert sands. Two forgotten empires, two mysteries that still puzzle historians today. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. Picture the highlands of northern Ethiopia in the 1st century of the Common Era. The air is thin at this altitude, the landscape dramatic, rugged mountains giving way to fertile valleys. This is where the ancient city of Aksum stood, perched at the crossroads of 3 continents: Africa to the south and west, Arabia across the Red Sea to the east, and far to the north, the Mediterranean world of Rome and Greece. In this strategic location, an empire was rising, an empire that would become so powerful, so wealthy, that a Persian prophet would name it as one of the 4 greatest powers on earth, alongside Rome, Persia, and China. The Kingdom of Aksum. You've probably never heard of it. Most people haven't, and that's what makes this story so fascinating, because for several centuries this African empire was absolutely dominant in its region. It controlled trade routes that moved goods from India to Rome. It conquered neighbouring kingdoms. It developed its own written language, its own currency, its own magnificent architectural style. And then it disappeared. Not overnight, but gradually, slipping from prominence, fading from memory, until even its own people seemed to forget the glory days of their ancestors. When European explorers arrived in Ethiopia centuries later, they found massive stone monuments, towering obelisks, the ruins of palaces. But the locals couldn't explain who had built them. The knowledge had been lost. Tonight, we're recovering that lost history. We're uncovering the story of an empire that deserves to be remembered alongside Rome and Persia. An empire that changed the course of African Christianity, that mastered maritime trade, that built monuments which still stand today as testament to their engineering genius. Let's begin at the beginning. Who were the Aksumites? Where did they come from? The truth is, we're not entirely sure. The origins of Aksum are shrouded in mystery. What we know is this: by around 100 CE, a sophisticated urban civilization had emerged in the highlands of what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea. They called their capital Aksum, and it quickly became a bustling metropolis. Archaeological evidence suggests the Aksumites developed from an earlier culture called DMT, which had flourished in the same region centuries before. But there's also evidence of cultural exchange with the Sabaeans, people from southern Arabia, across the Red Sea. Some early scholars thought the Aksumites were actually Sabaean colonists, but modern archaeology tells a different story. The Aksumites were indigenous Africans who had extensive contact with Arabian traders and gradually absorbed some of their cultural practices. By the 3rd century CE, the Aksumite Empire was in full bloom. The capital city of Aksum may have had a population of 20,000 people or more. That might not sound like much by modern standards, but understand, this was a major urban centre for its time, comparable to many Roman cities. The city was remarkable. Massive stone obelisks towered over the landscape, some reaching heights of over 70 feet. These weren't just monuments, they were declarations of power. Each obelisk was carved to represent a multi-story building, complete with false doors and windows. The largest obelisk ever erected in Aksum was over 100 feet tall and weighed an estimated 500 tons. Think about that for a moment. A single piece of carved granite weighing as much as a small building, somehow transported and erected without modern machinery. How did they do it? We still don't fully understand the Aksumite engineering techniques, but clearly this was a civilization with a remarkable technical knowledge. The city also boasted elaborate palaces. The largest, known as Dungur Palace, had over 50 rooms arranged around a central courtyard. It featured a sophisticated water management system with reservoirs and channels. The walls were constructed with precisely cut stone, fitted together without mortar, in a style unique to Aksum. And everywhere you would have seen wealth, gold jewellery, ivory carvings, imported ceramics from as far away as Rome and India. Because Aksum's power was built on trade, international trade on a massive scale. Let me explain what made Aksum so strategically important. The empire controlled the port of Adulis on the Red Sea coast. This wasn't just any port. Adulis was the gateway between the Roman Mediterranean world and the riches of Africa and the East. Merchants would arrive at Adulis carrying goods from across the known world: silk from China, spices from India, pearls from the Persian Gulf. These goods would be unloaded and transported inland to Aksum, then redistributed throughout northeastern Africa. But more importantly, Aksum controlled the export of African goods that the wider world desperately wanted: ivory from elephant tusks, rhinoceros horn, gold and precious stones, exotic animals like monkeys and leopards, and most valuable of all, incense. The ancient world was obsessed with incense. Frankincense and myrrh, harvested from trees in southern Arabia and the Horn of Africa, were worth their weight in gold. They were burned in temples throughout the Roman Empire, used in religious ceremonies, in medicine, for preserving the dead. The demand was insatiable, and the Aksumites controlled the supply. They didn't produce all of it themselves. Much of the frankincense came from southern Arabia, but Aksumite merchants and military power ensured that these goods flowed through their territory, through their markets, generating massive tariffs and profits. The wealth this generated was staggering. We know because the Aksumites did something remarkable for an African kingdom of their time. They minted their own coins: gold coins, silver coins, and bronze coins, each with the king's image and inscriptions in Greek and Ge'ez, the Aksumite language. This was sophisticated. Minting currency required not just wealth, but technical knowledge of metalworking, of standardized weights and measures, of international trade conventions. It also announced to the world, "We are a major power. We are equals to Rome." And Rome noticed. Roman merchants regularly travelled to Aksum. A Greek text called the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, written around 60 CE, describes Aksum as a major trading centre, where Greek merchants mixed with Aksumite officials and African traders. The text describes the trade goods, the journey inland from the coast, the 3-day trip from Adulis to Aksum itself. This wasn't some remote, unknown kingdom. Aksum was fully integrated into the international trade networks of the ancient world. But trade wasn't their only strength. The Aksumites were also formidable military power. In the 4th century CE, King Ezana launched a campaign against the Kingdom of Kush, Aksum's rival to the west in what is now Sudan. Kush had been a major civilization for over 1,000 years. Its capital, Meroe, was a centre of iron production and trade, but by the 4th century, Kush was in decline. King Ezana saw an opportunity. He invaded. The Aksumite army destroyed Meroe, conquered Kushite territory, and absorbed it into the Aksumite Empire. We know about this campaign because Ezana erected stone monuments describing his victories. These monuments, written in 3 languages, Greek, Sabaean, and Ge'ez, provide remarkable historical details. They describe how Ezana's forces marched through Kushite lands, how they burned crops, captured livestock, took prisoners. The language is brutal but specific. This wasn't mythology, it was history being recorded in real time. The monuments also reveal something else, something that would change Aksum forever. King Ezana's early inscriptions invoke pagan deities, gods of southern Arabia, gods of the local Ethiopian pantheon. But his later inscriptions invoke a different power. They begin with phrases like, "In the power of the Lord of Heaven, and in the faith of God and of Jesus Christ." Ezana had converted to Christianity. This happened around 325 to 330 CE, making Aksum one of the very first kingdoms in the world to officially embrace Christianity. The conversion story, as told in Ethiopian tradition, involves a Syrian Christian named Frumentius. Frumentius was travelling by ship along the Red Sea when pirates attacked. Most of the crew was killed, but Frumentius and his brother survived and were taken to the Aksumite court. There, Frumentius became an advisor to the royal family and tutor to the young prince Ezana. When Ezana became king, Frumentius convinced him to convert to Christianity. Ezana then declared Christianity the state religion. Churches were built throughout the kingdom. Aksum became the first sub-Saharan African state to embrace this new faith. This wasn't just a religious change, it was a political masterstroke. Christianity linked Aksum to Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire centered in Constantinople. Byzantine emperors saw themselves as protectors of Christendom. By becoming Christian, Aksum gained a powerful ally. This alliance would soon be tested. In the 6th century CE, a crisis erupted in Yemen, across the Red Sea from Aksum. Yemen at that time was controlled by the Himyarite kingdom, which had converted to Judaism. The Himyarite king, Du-Nuwas, began persecuting Christians in his realm. The Byzantine emperor was outraged, but Byzantium was too far away to intervene directly. So Emperor Justin I turned to Aksum. King Caleb of Aksum, a Christian monarch with military power in the region, was the perfect instrument for Byzantine revenge. King Caleb assembled a massive force. Sources claim he sent 70 ships carrying thousands of soldiers across the Red Sea. They landed in Yemen and waged a brutal campaign against Du-Nuwas. The Himyarite forces were crushed. Du-Nuwas was killed. Yemen was conquered and incorporated into the Aksumite Empire. For the next 70 years, Aksum controlled both sides of the Red Sea, dominating all trade through this crucial waterway. This was Aksum at its absolute peak, an empire spanning from the highlands of Ethiopia to the deserts of Yemen. A Christian kingdom allied with Byzantium, a military and economic superpower. At its height in the 4th to 6th centuries CE, the Aksumite Empire controlled an area roughly the size of modern Ethiopia and Eritrea, plus parts of Sudan, Yemen, and Saudi Arabia. They had developed a written language that's still used in Ethiopian religious texts today. They built architectural monuments that rival anything in Rome. They minted gold coins that circulated as far as India. And then it all began to unravel. The decline of Aksum is almost as mysterious as its rise. We know it happened gradually over several centuries, beginning in the 7th century CE. But the exact causes are debated. One major factor was the rise of Islam. In the 7th century, Islamic armies swept out of Arabia, conquering vast territories with remarkable speed. They took control of Egypt. They dominated the eastern Mediterranean. Most importantly for Aksum, they seized control of the Red Sea trade routes. Suddenly, Aksum's greatest asset, its control of maritime trade, was gone. Muslim merchants and Muslim naval power now dominated the sea lanes. Aksum found itself economically isolated. The Aksumites lost their holdings in Yemen. They lost control of their vital port at Adulis. Trade revenues collapsed. Without that wealth, the centralized state began to fracture. But economics wasn't the only problem. Environmental factors played a role too. Archaeological evidence suggests that soil degradation became a serious issue. Centuries of intensive agriculture without proper land management had depleted the soil around Aksum. Rainfall patterns also seem to have shifted, making agriculture more difficult. There may also have been epidemic disease. Some scholars suggest that the plague of Justinian, which devastated the Byzantine Empire in the 6th century, may have reached Aksum as well. The bubonic plague would have decimated population centres, disrupted trade, and weakened the state. And then there were internal pressures. New populations were migrating into the region. The Beja people, nomadic pastoralists, began pushing into Aksumite territory from the west. The Aksumite state, weakened economically and possibly depleted by disease, couldn't maintain control. By the 8th century, Aksum had ceased to mint coins. This is a clear sign of state collapse. When a government can no longer produce currency, it's in serious trouble. The capital itself was eventually abandoned. The royal court moved south to a new location called Kubar, whose exact location is still unknown. Power shifted to a different elite group, the Agau people, who established the Zagwe dynasty centered at the city of Lalibela. And as the centuries passed, knowledge of Aksum's glory faded. The massive obelisks remained standing, but nobody seemed to remember who had erected them or why. The ruined palaces crumbled further. Farmers built their houses on top of ancient Aksumite structures. By the time European travellers arrived in Ethiopia in the 1500s and 1600s, Aksum had been largely forgotten. The Portuguese were astonished to find these massive stone monuments in the Ethiopian Highlands. They asked the locals who had built them. Nobody knew. It wasn't until the late 1800s and early 1900s that archaeologists began to reconstruct Aksum's history. German archaeologists conducted the first scientific excavations in 1906. What they found was revelation after revelation. The sophisticated palaces, the elaborate tombs, the inscriptions in multiple languages, the evidence of far-flung trade networks. Slowly, the story of Aksum emerged from obscurity. And what a story it was! An African empire that had been one of the most powerful states of its time. A kingdom that had defeated rivals, controlled vital trade routes, and shaped the religious landscape of an entire region. Today, the ruins of Aksum are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The towering obelisks still stand, testaments to an engineering prowess that we're only beginning to fully appreciate. Churches built in the Gondarian period, centuries later, sit atop Aksumite foundations. And according to Ethiopian tradition, one church in particular, the Church of Saint Mary of Zion, houses the greatest treasure of all, the Ark of the Covenant. Ethiopian tradition holds that Menelik IV, the son of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon, brought the Ark from Jerusalem to Aksum. Whether this is true or not, we'll never know. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church claims the Ark still rests in a chapel at Aksum, guarded by a single monk who is the only person allowed to see it. Archaeological evidence? None. Scientific proof? Impossible, because the church won't allow anyone near the supposed Ark. So this remains one of history's great mysteries, tangled up with the already mysterious history of Aksum itself. What we do know for certain is this: Aksum was real, it was powerful, and it was far more significant than most history books acknowledge. The Kingdom of Aksum controlled territories spanning multiple modern nations. It developed a unique written script that evolved into the Ge'ez script, still used by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church today. It was a pioneer in African Christianity, bringing this religion to the heart of the continent 1,000 years before European missionaries arrived. It built monuments that required engineering knowledge we still don't fully understand. It maintained trade relationships spanning from India to Rome. It defeated kingdoms and built an empire that lasted for centuries. And yet, for over a millennium, this empire was forgotten. its story erased from history, its achievements attributed to foreign invaders or explained away as impossible. Only in the last century have we begun to recover the truth about Aksum, to recognize it as one of the great civilizations of the ancient world, to understand that African history is far richer and more complex than colonial narratives suggested. The kingdom of Aksum fell around 960 CE, but it left a legacy. Ethiopian Christianity traces its roots directly to Aksumite conversion in the 4th century. The Ge'ez language, though no longer spoken, remains the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Church. And those massive obelisks, standing silent in the Ethiopian Highlands, remind us that powerful civilizations can rise and fall, and be forgotten, before being rediscovered again. The mystery of Aksum isn't just what caused its decline. The mystery is why we forgot about it in the first place. Now let's turn to a very different empire, a civilization built not in fertile highlands, but in the most inhospitable desert. A people who started as nomadic camel traders and built one of the most spectacular cities the ancient world had ever seen. Let's talk about the Nabataeans and their hidden capital Petra. Imagine you're traveling through the deserts of what is now Jordan around 300 BCE. The landscape is brutal. Red sandstone cliffs, brutal heat during the day, freezing cold at night. Water is scarce. Most people avoid this region entirely. But not the Nabataeans. Somehow, these people not only survived in this harsh environment, they thrived. They built an empire here, and they kept their methods secret for centuries. Who were the Nabataeans? Where did they come from? These are questions that historians still debate. The first written mention of the Nabataeans appears in 312 BCE, when a Greek general named Antigonus tried to conquer them. Antigonus was one of Alexander the Great's successors, ruling over much of Syria and the eastern Mediterranean. He had heard about these desert traders who had accumulated vast wealth, and he wanted it. He sent an army of 4,600 soldiers into the desert to attack the Nabataean stronghold and seize their treasure. It was a disaster. The Nabataeans, mounted on camels and intimately familiar with the desert terrain, massacred the Greek forces. According to historical accounts, nearly all 4,600 soldiers were killed. It was a humiliating defeat for one of Alexander's mighty generals. This tells us something important about the Nabataeans. They weren't just peaceful merchants, they were fierce warriors when necessary, and they knew how to use their environment as a weapon. But mostly, they preferred trade to war, and they were exceptionally good at it. The Nabataeans had discovered something valuable. In the deserts of southern Arabia, in what is now Yemen, grew two precious commodities, frankincense and myrrh. These aromatic resins, harvested from certain trees, were among the most valuable substances in the ancient world. The problem was getting them from southern Arabia to the markets of the Mediterranean. The journey was long, dangerous, and required crossing vast stretches of waterless desert. Most merchants couldn't do it. They didn't know the routes. They didn't know where the hidden water sources were. They would die of thirst trying. But the Nabataeans knew. They had spent generations mapping the desert. They knew every hidden spring, every water source, every safe route through the wasteland. And they kept this knowledge secret. If you were a merchant wanting to move frankincense from Yemen to Gaza, or spices from Arabia to Damascus, you had to hire the Nabataeans. There was no other option, and the Nabataeans charged handsomely for their services, reportedly taking up to 25% of the value of goods they transported. Over time, this made them extraordinarily wealthy. We're talking about one of the richest trading networks in the ancient world. Gold, silver, precious gems. The Nabataeans accumulated wealth that would make modern billionaires jealous. And where did they keep this wealth? Where was their capital? For centuries, nobody knew. The Nabataeans seemed to have no fixed cities. They were nomads, living in goatskin tents, moving across the desert, or so everyone thought. But the Nabataeans had a secret. hidden away in a mountain cleft, accessible only through a narrow crack in the rock. They had built a city unlike any other. Petra. The site was perfect from a defensive standpoint. To reach Petra, you had to pass through the Sekyu, a narrow gorge over 1,200 meters long and only 3 to 6 meters wide at points. The canyon walls tower 100 meters above you. It's like walking through a crack in the mountain. An enemy army trying to attack through the Sik would be slaughtered. They'd be forced into single file, unable to maneuver, while defenders above rained down arrows and rocks. It was essentially unassailable. But Petra wasn't just a fortress. It was a masterpiece of architecture and engineering. The Nabataeans didn't build their city with conventional construction. They carved it directly into the living sandstone. Entire temples, tombs, houses, all carved out of solid rock. The sandstone is a beautiful rose-red colour, which is why Petra is sometimes called the Rose City. The most famous structure is Al-Kazne, known as the Treasury. It's the first thing you see when you exit the Sik, a massive facade carved into the cliff face, standing 40 meters tall. It's decorated with columns, statues, and intricate carvings, all in that distinctive rose-red stone. The Treasury alone would be an impressive monument, but Petra has hundreds of these rock-cut structures, entire neighborhoods carved into the cliffs, tombs of Nabataean royalty, each more elaborate than the last, temples, an amphitheatre that could seat 6,000 people, carved directly out of the mountainside. And everywhere, evidence of sophisticated water management. The Nabataeans were masters of hydraulics. They carved channels into the rock to capture every drop of rainwater. They built cisterns to store water underground. They created a system of pipes and aqueducts that brought water from distant springs directly into the city. In the middle of a desert, Petra had running water, gardens, even public fountains. This wasn't just impressive engineering, it was miraculous. How did they do it? The Nabataeans had developed advanced knowledge of hydrology and geology. They understood how water moved through the landscape. They knew how to identify underground aquifers. They developed waterproof cement to line their cisterns and channels. This expertise made Petra habitable. It also made it prosperous. Merchants traveling the desert routes knew that Petra was a reliable source of water and supplies. The city became not just a capital, but a major trading hub. At its peak around the 1st century BCE and 1st century CE, Petra may have had a population of 20,000 to 30,000 people. That's massive for a city built in the desert. It was cosmopolitan, with traders from across the known world passing through. Egyptian goods, Greek pottery, Roman glassware. Archaeologists have found artifacts from everywhere. The Nabataeans absorbed influences from all these cultures. Their architecture shows Greek and Roman influences. They adopted certain Egyptian and Mesopotamian artistic styles, but they blended all of this with their own unique Arabian aesthetic, creating something entirely their own. They also developed their own script, a variant of Aramaic. Hundreds of Nabataean inscriptions have been found carved into rocks throughout their territory. Most are quite simple, a person's name, perhaps a short greeting or prayer, but they tell us that literacy was widespread in Nabataean society. Unfortunately, the Nabataeans didn't write extensive historical texts, or if they did, they haven't survived. So most of what we know about them comes from Greek and Roman sources, which are often hostile or dismissive. The Roman historian Diodorus, writing around 30 to 20 BCE, called the Nabataeans pillagers and pirates. This probably reflects Roman prejudice more than reality. The Nabataeans were competitors, controlling trade routes that Rome wanted to dominate. Of course, the Romans would portray them negatively. What's clear is that the Nabataeans were a sophisticated civilization. They weren't just desert raiders. They had complex social structures, religious practices, artistic traditions, and technological knowledge. Their religion was particularly interesting. The Nabataeans worshipped several deities, the most important being Dushara, a god associated with mountains and the sun. They also venerated Al-Uzza, a goddess connected with water and fertility. But the Nabataeans represented their gods in an unusual way. Instead of elaborate statues, they used simple stone blocks called battles. These rectangular blocks, sometimes with schematized facial features, but often completely plain, were placed in temples and sacred high places. This minimalist approach to religious art reflects the Nabataean Arabian heritage. It's quite different from the elaborate idols of Greek and Roman religion. The Nabataeans were blending cultures, but they retained their distinctive Arabian identity. For several centuries, the Nabataean kingdom remained independent, growing increasingly wealthy and powerful. They formed alliances with various neighbouring states, sometimes even with Rome itself. But Rome was always watching, always expanding. And the Nabataeans controlled something Rome wanted: the trade routes. In the 1st century CE, Rome began tightening its grip on the region. They conquered Egypt in 30 BCE. They absorbed much of Syria. The Nabataean kingdom found itself surrounded by Roman territory, nominally independent, but really a client state paying tribute to Rome. The last Nabataean king was Rabel II Sota, who ruled from around 70 CE to 106 CE. When he died, something happened that Roman historians describe as peaceful annexation. They claim the Nabataean kingdom simply passed to Rome without resistance. In 106 CE, the Roman Emperor Trajan declared the region the new province of Arabia Petraea. Petra became just another Roman provincial city. The Nabataeans became Roman subjects, and that's where the mystery deepens. Roman histories tell us the annexation was peaceful. But is that really what happened? Recent archaeological evidence suggests a very different story. Italian scholar Paolo Cimadomo has analysed Safayitic inscriptions, rock carvings found throughout the former Nabataean territory. These inscriptions, made by Nabataean and related Arab tribes, tell a different tale. They mention a war of the Nabataeans. They describe the year of the struggle between the Romans and the Nabataeans. One inscription specifically states, "The year in which Malachos, king of Nabataea, smote 30 centuries of Roman soldiers," meaning 3,000 Roman troops killed in battle. Why don't Roman historians mention this war? Possibly because they lost it, at least initially. Roman pride wouldn't allow admitting defeat to desert bandits. So they rewrote the narrative. They portrayed the annexation as peaceful, as if the Nabataeans willingly submitted to superior Roman civilization. But the evidence suggests the Nabataeans fought. And they may have fought for decades, or even centuries after 106 CE. The region remained turbulent. Roman sources from later centuries describe ongoing conflicts with Arab tribes in the area. These may have been Nabataean resistance movements that Roman historians chose not to identify as such. What happened to Petra itself? The city continued to exist under Roman rule. The Romans built new structures, a colonnaded street in the Roman style, new public buildings. They renovated the city to fit Roman urban planning ideals. But something was changing. Trade routes were shifting. Rome was opening new sea routes through the Red Sea, bypassing the land routes that had made the Nabataeans wealthy. The economic foundation of Petra was eroding. Then in the 4th century CE, a massive earthquake struck. Substantial portions of Petra were destroyed. The intricate water system was damaged. Many buildings collapsed. The city was rebuilt to some extent, but it never fully recovered. Christianity was spreading through the region by this time, and churches were built in Petra. But the population was declining. More earthquakes followed in subsequent centuries. The water system, that engineering marvel that had made life possible in the desert, gradually failed. Without reliable water, Petra became uninhabitable. By the 7th century CE, when Muslim armies conquered the region, Petra was largely abandoned. The remaining population had mostly moved away. The great city carved into the rock stood empty, slowly being reclaimed by the desert. And here's the truly fascinating part. The Nabataeans, as a distinct people, simply disappeared. Their culture, their language, their identity, it all vanished. Under Roman rule, the Nabataeans had gradually adopted Roman customs. They learned Latin. They built Roman-style buildings. They integrated into Roman society. After the Islamic conquest, the remaining Nabataean descendants converted to Islam, adopted Arabic, and assimilated into Arab culture. The Nabataean language, that variant of Aramaic, died out. The last Nabataean inscriptions date to around the 4th century CE. After that, nothing. The language was gone. Their religion disappeared too. As Christianity, and later Islam, spread through the region, the old Nabataean gods were abandoned. The beetles, those simple stone blocks representing Dushara and Aluza, were forgotten. Within a few centuries, nobody remembered who the Nabataeans were. The name itself faded from memory. Petra, that spectacular city carved in stone, was lost. Local Bedouins knew it existed, but to the wider world, Petra had vanished. For over 1,200 years, Petra remained lost. A hidden city in a mountain cleft, known only to the nomadic tribes who occasionally sheltered in its ruins. Then in 1812, a Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt managed to find it. Burckhardt was an extraordinary character. He had trained in England and planned to explore Africa, but he needed to master Arabic and Islamic customs first. So he travelled to Syria, adopted the name Sheikh Ibrahim ibn Abdullah, and spent 2 years perfecting his disguise as an Arab traveller. He had heard rumours of ancient ruins hidden in the mountains near the Dead Sea, but reaching them was dangerous. If locals discovered he was a European, he might be killed. So Burckhardt concocted a clever plan. He told his Bedouin guides that he had vowed to sacrifice a goat at the tomb of Aaron, which was said to be located near these ruins. This gave him an excuse to travel through the area. His guides led him through the sick, and when Burckhardt emerged and saw the treasury, he realised he had found something extraordinary. He couldn't stop to examine it too closely without arousing suspicion, so he made his sacrifice quickly and left. But he made careful notes of everything he saw. When Burckhardt's journals were published after his death, they caused a sensation. A lost city, carved entirely from rock, hidden in the Jordanian desert. It seemed impossible, but it was real, and soon archaeologists and adventurers were racing to see it for themselves. What they found exceeded all expectations. Not just the treasury, but hundreds of carved structures. The monastery, even larger than the treasury, the royal tombs, the amphitheatre, the elaborate water system. Petra became famous worldwide. Today, it's one of the most visited archaeological sites in the world, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and one of the new 7 wonders of the world. But the Nabataeans themselves remain mysterious. We've recovered their city, but we've barely recovered their story. Archaeologists continue to excavate at Petra, uncovering new structures, new inscriptions, new evidence of Nabataean life. We've learned that they were far more than just traders. They were engineers, architects, artists. They created a hybrid culture that blended Arabian, Greek, Egyptian, and Mesopotamian influences into something unique. We've learned that they valued water above all else, developing technologies that allowed them to thrive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. We've learned that they were fierce when necessary, but preferred negotiation and commerce to war. And we've learned that their assimilation into Roman and later Islamic culture was so complete that their very identity was erased. The Nabataean people didn't die out. They simply became someone else. Their descendants are still alive today, but they don't know their own heritage. The connection was severed centuries ago. This is what makes the Nabataean story so haunting. They built Petra, a city that still stands as one of humanity's great architectural achievements. But the people who built it, their language, their culture, their way of life, all of that is gone. Today, when you walk through Petra, you're walking through a city whose inhabitants are ghosts. We can see what they built, but we can barely hear their voices. A few hundred inscriptions, mostly just names, some descriptions from Greek and Roman writers who didn't understand or respect them. Archaeological evidence that tells us what they did, but not who they were. The Nabataeans carved a city into solid rock, but they couldn't carve their story into history. They mastered the desert, but they couldn't master time. They accumulated wealth that rivaled empires, but they couldn't preserve their identity. In 106 CE, Rome annexed the Nabataean kingdom. Within a few centuries, the Nabataeans had vanished, absorbed into larger cultures, their uniqueness lost. The city they built outlasted them by millennia. Petra stands today, beautiful and haunting, a testament to a people we can no longer truly know. Two empires, two forgotten kingdoms, Aksum and Nabataea. Both were major powers in their time. Both controlled vital trade routes. Both left behind spectacular monuments. And both were forgotten for centuries, erased from the historical record. Aksum vanished because of economic collapse, environmental degradation, and the rise of Islam. Its story was eventually recovered, but only in the last century have we truly begun to appreciate its significance. The Nabataeans vanished because of cultural assimilation. They became Romans, then Arabs, then simply nothing. Their story is still being uncovered, piece by piece, as archaeologists excavate Petra and decipher inscriptions. What do these forgotten empires tell us? Perhaps that power is fleeting, that even the mightiest kingdoms can disappear. That history is written by those who survive, and sometimes the most fascinating stories are the ones that almost got erased entirely. The Kingdom of Aksum was one of the four greatest powers of the ancient world, yet most people have never heard of it. The Nabataeans built one of the most spectacular cities ever created, yet we know almost nothing about who they really were. These are the forgotten empires, the kingdoms that slipped through history's cracks, the civilizations that might have been completely lost if not for a few stone monuments and scattered archaeological evidence. Tonight, we've recovered their stories. We've remembered what the world once forgot. We've honoured the achievements of peoples who deserved better than obscurity. If you found these forgotten empires fascinating, consider exploring the ruins that remain. Aksum's towering obelisks still stand in northern Ethiopia. Petra welcomes visitors from around the world. These aren't just archaeological sites. They're testaments to human ingenuity, to civilizations that rose in unlikely places and achieved extraordinary things. Until tomorrow, when we explore more mysteries from the past, take care. This has been Soft Spoken Mysteries.